Right. Would you believe it, Marvin? There's an African president who's actually preparing to leave power a few weeks from now and possibly passing it to a footballer. How about that? This is Afro Politico. This is Afro Political, the Africa edition. Two guys, two mics, two stiff drinks this time around. At our local here at Jay's Bar in Westlands. I'm James Smart.
I'm Marvin Tumbo.
All right, welcome everyone. Let's get started. But before we do, to your comments straight. We love your comments and we're always looking out for it. Ismail Abu Yassin.
Doc.
Thank you very much. We love your comments. And Marvin loves your comments as well. Right? You say Museveni is just one of the dying despots remaining in Africa. But what I've never fathomed is this. For how long do these types reckon they can hold a nation hostage? That is the question number one. But time will tell. But nearer to Uganda is a benevolent dictator being groomed. I wonder where this benevolent dictator who's being groomed. But let's answer his first question first. Because we've seen this before. We said it with Laurent Gbagbo in Ivory Coast when, his elections went the way it did. I think around 2010 or thereabouts, if I'm not wrong. Tried to stay in power for a bit of time. It didn't go the way it did. Finally, Ouattara checked in. We saw it most recently, Yahya Jammeh, right? Again, elections went the way they did. He somehow said, well, I'm conceding, then didn't concede. He had to be, literally just away, handed from office. And we've seen this. I mean, we can go back to history to Mobutu Sese Seko times and all these times. We have all this history of how, at some point, when the people get tired, they take you out of office, and including Burkina Faso, I think, in 2015. And we can mention, other countries as well. But what is in the psyche of a leader who has stayed in office, obviously overstayed his welcome, and still somehow believes that he has that, another 5 years, another 10 years. Somehow they believe this. What goes to their mind?
I'm more optimistic about the continent because what you find is people who are asking these kinds of questions, number one, because that's where it all starts.
Right.
It starts with questions. Yeah, same questions you've asked, same questions Doc has asked. And when you have questions, someone must answer them, or someone will be made to answer them. So questions are important,
Yes.
and which is why in any democracy, and I think especially here, you'll find situations where nothing goes unquestioned. The constitutionality, we have laws that allows us to question everything, that allow you to go to any court of the land and say, okay, I don't agree with this. I seek interpretation. So I think that we are getting there, not just as Kenya or the region, but as a continent. Even in Uganda, it's not. We are not looking at a situation where it's a walk in the park. Yeah, it's not a walk in the park. You had a proper fight in parliament.
I think they're trying to put themselves out there for the first time,
Yes.
and provide a different sort of narrative and a cogent argument as to why it is wrong for the entire course of history of Uganda to be changed by one person who wants to continue to stay in office.
No.
And they're making good arguments while at it.
The fact that guys are able to actually say, look, I don't agree with this for X, Y, Z reasons, and you are able to see it, which means you have a certain audience that's starting to appreciate because someone has taken that first step to say, you know what, I don't agree with this. And the more difficult it becomes for people, or rather for certain individual institutions to think they can take guys for a ride. I think you'll have, which is why I'm saying I'm more optimistic about the continent, because we have, the space is opening up for younger people to comment, younger people to vie, and
Right.
even in Uganda, you'll say it's young people who are taking the lead.
Let's go to our first point and our first story of the week. And straight off to Liberia. Salif Johnson, 10 years on, or is it maybe slightly longer or thereabouts? Is it
12, 10 or 12.
10? I think around 10 or so years.
12 years.
Yeah, 12 years. She had a bit of a transitional period before she got into office. But yeah, Liberians are preparing to go to an election. She's preparing. The biggest story for me is her preparing to hand over power. Okay, of course, Liberia, with the history of Liberia, decades ago, awful violence, and I think it's ICC has already convicted the former warlord there. So things are starting to sort of gel very well. The country's starting to put itself back very well. They're starting to build institutions, and she has been very, I think, consistent. As someone who I think one of the examples, I think, in this continent of people who have very well educated, worked to the tops of international organizations, then went back home and found a voice and a space inside her own country and had this wonderful opportunity to serve. All right. I'm sure if you go through her career, you'd have areas where people will disagree with her and issues that, didn't go as well as projected. But 10 years on, she's prepared to leave office. Given that we've just been talking about someone else who's been in office for 36 or 38 years and wanting to extend, this is remarkable first for Liberia.
It's important also to examine what she did while in office. I think that would be crucial. Liberians can answer that better than anyone else. But the democratic space, I think, on the continent, this is the direction it's moving to. As you find more people and more countries, the generation that has been holding on to power, these are their last days. Yeah, the writing is on the wall for most of them. You are having a younger representation in the AU in terms of the leaders who are coming in. And I think I'm very optimistic about the continent going forward in terms of the types of leadership, people who are putting themselves onto power. And when you talk about gender, let's remember that this is the first lady president on the continent. And maybe it's time also to see where are the rest. Do the rest of the countries have the kind of liberal mindset, or are they enabling enough in their laws to also facilitate certain movements to the highest office on the land?
I extract a few things from Liberia and Liberia's situation. Every country goes through traumatic periods and places whereby it sort of defines what happens next in a country. Famously, Rwanda has to be the genocide in 1993. If it's Uganda, it has to be, before 86, and everything that happened before then. For Kenya, it's 2007, post-election violence. And for some reason, these traumatic events that countries go through, they either define the political discourse next and how a country is either held back by a leader or by its institutions or the failure of that, and them refusing to move forward, or looking at that event we know that sort of occurred in their country and look at it through the correct prism, which is that for the Liberians, for instance, there is a question of how their resources were being used and misused, and the question on how different communities would have the share of those resources. And in the 10 years that Liberians have had this president and this government, we haven't had them sort of going back to this very traumatic period in their lives. I think she has worked so hard to build high institutions, because the realization that institutions are going to be the guarantor of every Liberian moving forward.
I wish you could apply the same argument to Kenya, because it would be welcome, especially from you, in terms of appreciating how our institutions do work, in terms of appreciating that it's not an individual mandate. Yeah, there's only so much an individual can do in terms of moving a country forward. And the reason I support your statement about Liberia is that a country must be led by its institutions. Yeah, when you read the history of governance across multiple jurisdictions, the very best of them have the best institutions on the land because they become the guarantor. And as you said, I'll go back to my argument, which is rule of law, rule by law. Rule of law, again, guarantees the president or the highest office of the highest individual who owns the land, be it a king or whatever. Yeah. Rule by law is the institutions. I think if all she did was to ensure the institutions are functioning well, I think that's the best foundation for the country to build on and for the next president to build on.
Right.
Because he has now the freedom to focus on everything else.
Hopefully, George Weah, the great footballer, might have better luck this time and score a goal and become the president of Liberia. But
That is an awful pun.
lots of props to Liberians, whether George Weah scores an offside goal or not. Catalonia, Spain. Now, this story has been building for years.
Yeah.
All right. When they had an election in Spain, I think in 2015 or 2016, with all these bubbles of the young, different political elites being uncomfortable with the established system that is in the Spanish, controlling the
Madrid.
Spain. Yeah. And the election went the way it did. We had a new party with, sort of brought some sort of a political revolution on how, and they won a few seats. They didn't win the elections, won a few seats. And hopefully they're trying to change how Spain and its politics is being, governed and moving forward. But Spain has had this problem about Catalonia for years. It's always been there, always been building up. And the people who belong into this part of Spain who don't think and don't feel their issues are being well catered for by the government and by establishment of the king and whatever, feel just, hang on, we just don't feel we are at peace with you guys. So we're going to secede.
I've seen the de facto leader of Catalonia visit, for instance, the States, and no one knows him, no one invites him for any kind of talks or whatnot, because at the end of the day,
It's not recognized.
it's not recognized.
Right.
Yeah. I only have one issue with regard to secessionist movements, and that is it takes a lot to build.
Right.
Yeah. Look even at Brexit. You have a country that's properly functioning, but just the process of divorce is gonna last 2 years.
The rights of people to self-determine,
Yeah.
because it's at the center and the core of this.
It is.
That if a people do not think and do not believe that they belong to the overall larger context of a nationhood,
Yeah.
I think they have inherent rights. They don't give it
No,
away.
they do.
They
They
have
do.
inherent right to say, we would like to withdraw ourselves from that and see if we can make it in this sort of setup at this
But
end.
also consider this, yeah. Consider the situation that happened even leading up to the Civil War in the U.S. Yeah, you had states that said if Lincoln was actually elected as president, they would secede.
They tried to say it.
Yeah, but they would secede, and you have quite a number. Actually, a number did. Yeah, so you have these guys, and actually. By those standards, what they felt were noble and noble reasons, which now, again, like, okay, it's a bit weird to sit for such reasons. I think there is, and even the arguments that have been made for secession, in terms of even the Britain breaking out of EU,
Yeah.
it's only now that you find guys are like, you know what, I wish I had known. Because the politics tends to murky the waters, to mark the waters quite a bit, so that there is no clarity. And I would wish that guys be more clear, so that you know what it is you're getting into.
Let's go further north and off to the United States of America and in Las Vegas. Awful killing. 58 people lay dead after a gunman. Now we know, he had multiple of weapons, went to a hotel, fired shots at a concert, such an awful event, right? And now, for the first time, there's bubbles in America to start discussing gun controls, gun laws, background checks, who can have guns. Because this individual walked into a hotel with dozens of guns, and it wasn't wrong. It didn't raise a finger or an eye.
2,000 guns.
Yeah. Who does that? Who does that? So there's a big problem in America. I mean, when they say that the biggest killer in America are guns, right? And they refuse to talk about it because it is this question of it's inherent, it's a right. But
Second Amendment.
Second Amendment and I have right to bear arms, so I will always have guns. If you look at, juxtapose what happens in America versus what happens in the UK, and the amount of deaths, that guns in the Americas versus the amount of deaths of guns in the UK where
Or
they
in
don't
Australia,
have,
where they enacted laws
right,
actually
about
to
guns.
yes,
Yeah, to gun control.
gun control.
Yeah. Then you see that this America is in this crazy place where they have to control guns.
No.
They just have to.
Who owns the lawmakers?
Well,
They're owned by the NRA.
yeah.
Yeah, they're owned by the NRA. NRA supports. Yeah, NRA supports, funds a lot of the senators, a lot of the House or whatever representatives, congressmen, a lot of it at state legislature. Yeah, this thing is not just it's not a walk in the park, because at the end of the day, these guys, their decisions have been paid for.
The political organization is a mess. That for sure. I think that it's in American politics, for instance, it's very difficult for you to move things if you don't have lobby groups. And if those lobby groups are very well catered for by, of course, the NRA or the interest groups. And this whole organization of the politics misses the individual American who has a will, who has a point of view, and who has a vote. They miss it. All right?
Yeah.
And my problem with this whole concept and this whole problem is that if you don't have a president or a politician in office and the Senate or in the House of Representatives who, at the end of the day, they don't belong to these, third interests other than the voters,
Yeah.
then the interest of Americans have not well taken care of. And I think the question of guns, for instance, if we had another politician, say Obama, I think because of many problems, he couldn't start those fights. All right?
No, he tried.
He could try to speak about it, and every time this happened, it could happen. But I think that because of the obvious problems of him, being either questioned about, his loyalty, or are you even American, and first are you half white or half black or whatever it is, I think these were two uncomfortable questions for him to start sorting out and getting into. But someone who I think has either charisma, depth of understanding, and I think the political wherewithal, like Obama, would get in. The first problem that need to deal with America is the gun problem. Because you need to counter it without including the issue of race, the issue of, that sort of thing.
To be honest, the only way you're going to have gun control in the States is if it's initiated by the Republican Party, by the conservatives.
Yes.
If
Of
that
course,
does
the
not,
Democrats can't.
if that does not happen, these will never stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. And consider that they own a majority of the state assemblies. Yeah. Within the National Senate, because any gun laws, there's a filibuster on them.
Yeah.
Any trials, has been a problem. And this is not the 60s or the 70s where you could have a majority leader who's able to whip people.
So, shall we say this is the time for reason? That just reasonable people, common sense.
Nah.
Isn't gun control a question of reason as well? Listen, if you just look at the numbers, Marvin, just numbers themselves are mind-boggling.
These numbers have been bad for a long time.
Yeah.
It's not just now.
No. I'm saying just look at the numbers. So it's a question of reason, because first, we have to appeal to people's reason, number one. That if you bring the emotional point of view, the Americans are so attached to their guns.
Yeah, they are.
All right? But you have to confront them with
which
reason.
is why
You have to confront them with numbers.
No, the logic and emotions.
The emotion is winning right now.
The emotion has always won.
Yeah.
And what you find is that NRA preys on emotion. Yeah, it preys on emotion when guys talk about the Second Amendment. Yeah, they don't. And which is why the argument that NRA is pushing right now, and all the Second Amendment hawks are saying, is guns themselves as tools don't kill people. It's people who kill people. Yeah. So
which is a stupid.
It's a stupid argument. But you see, now when you say you want to move to logic, that's the logic you're gonna deal with.
No. That's a very stupid argument. And as the logical one in this program, I'd like to end it at this point. I'm James Smart. Thank you very much for watching this program. The emotional one, Marvin.